Just dropping in at the top, we want to talk about the leaked Labour report and the racism in the Labour Party. And unfortunately, through circumstance and chance, we haven't been able to tackle this as yet. But we want you to know that we are working on this now, and hopefully we'll get this out in the near future. But we need your help to make this the segment that we want it to be.
So, as you might know, we have an open door policy on the podcast for any trans person of colour who wants to talk to us about an issue that is particularly close to their heart, that they're passionate about, for, you know, to showcase some art or resilience or whatever. We have an open door policy for BAME members of the trans community to come in and talk to us. We want to showcase those voices because we realise that's something that the pair of us just can't do.
So in regards to the Labour leaked report that showcased a whole bunch of racist shit in the Labour Party, we want to cover this because we feel that it is being covered up by people in the party and not reported in the press as it should be. But to do this right, we want to give the floor to people of colour who can talk to their experience of certain kinds of racism, specifically trans misogynoir. We are especially seeking out black trans women to talk on this particular point, but we are open to any and all trans people of colour from any and all cultural backgrounds to take our platform and tell us what they think and what they think we need to hear about this report. So please get in touch.
Find us on the line at twitter.com/whatthetrans, Facebook/whatthetrans, and Instagram we're also on there as whatthetrans, as well as our shiny, lovely website at whatthetrans.com.
Get in touch. You can have our platform to say what you think is important. Now on with the show.
Da, 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 da.
The category is What the Trans, darlings?
Hello. Welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans? I'm trying something new. Did it work? I don't think it worked. How are you, Michelle?
I'm good, but you are a good singer. You sing in one of your bands at the very least, right? Like, that's a thing you do.
I do that, yes. That is a thing that I do in my band, which is called St. Lucifer, and you should all absolutely look up online. How are you, Michelle?
Well, I've been playing a whole bunch of video games, and I took a few days off because my body was like, you're not going to go to the fuck to sleep for 14 hours. And I was like, I'm going to listen to you. And I felt incredible afterwards. I really did. And I've been taking it easy. I had some good food. And by good food, I mean terrible food. By terrible food, I mean fast food that came to my house, delivered by a very nice man. And
fair enough.
Yeah. Been worrying about Amazon.
So hang on, do you mean Amazon as in the, sort of globally based capitalist nightmare that mistreats its workers and does all sorts of terrible business for things? Or do you mean the Amazon rainforest, which is currently being destroyed and chances are it's a bit of a tipping point for carbon emissions on Earth? Which one of those do you mean?
Well, I mean both now.
Yeah, sorry.
But I was thinking primarily about Amazon, the company, because I am an Amazon Prime subscriber, and I wasn't entirely up on all of the latest goings on with what they do to their staff. I wasn't as informed because I live in the trans news world, and the crossover between Amazon and trans news has not really been that prominent, so I didn't know until about a month ago how terrible it was. So I was like, I want to quit my Amazon Prime subscription. But the issue is, my dad uses it for TV. And he doesn't know anything about tech, and I have no idea how to fix this problem. So if anybody has any genuine suggestions on how I stop funding Amazon whilst also not screwing over my dad's TV watching, who is 300 miles away, and we are in Corona land, and I have no idea how or when I'm ever going to see him to fix this. Is there any way I can find a way to stop paying Amazon money every month and not screw over my dad's TV? How are you doing, Ashley? I've done my little personal plea for help.
Indeed. As well you might, frankly. It's got to be a very specific ask. I know Twitter is kind of the repository of weird questions, but that's got to be a strange one in particular, like just because of the specifics of it, obviously. Like the whole Amazon not wanting to pay them any money thing, perfectly understandable. The bringing in your dad element is like, oh wow, there's a variable I wasn't expecting. Anyway, yes, I am all right. I too I've been doing a lot of food, obviously. Not doing a lot of food as in performing sex acts with the food. That would be weird, although I'm sure some people are into that. As in, I've been doing a lot of baking, so I've made like scones and banana bread. We did pizza earlier on tonight, so I've just had a delicious homemade, we did the pizza base and everything. So everything's been really wholesome, and yesterday I was like floating around the house making scones, wearing my pink dungarees, and then when I sat down I was reading a book about Studio Ghibli. So that's the level that I'm functioning on. And I'm just like, wow, how on earth did this get so pleasant and wholesome? And then feeling bad because I'm sure I shouldn't be enjoying myself while I'm in lockdown, but the fact that everybody's locked down means that my girlfriend is here with me, which I am enjoying the hell out of, of course. So yeah, everything is all right. I had a bit of a mental health thing the other week that I'm sure Michelle, but it seems to have sort of picked up from that. It's peaks and troughs, isn't it? It all can be quite dependent on the stuff that is happening in the world and that you and I make a point of looking at and learning about, so we can talk about it on this podcast, but it is still...
Yeah, I don't know, it doesn't seem to affect me anymore in an obvious way. I don't know what's happened, because I used to be the most sensitive to this, but then I think through the show and through the work I've done as a journalist for the last 5 years now, it helps my anxiety to reach into these things to find out what's happening, because usually when there's terrible things going on, there's always a thread that makes it not quite as bad, or in many cases, it was a complete load of nonsense from the start. I mean, that's kind of how word has got around about this show. We do that.
I was reflecting on this a little before we started recording, actually, because you are right, and I have noticed that you and I have swapped places. In that kind of emotional weighting of things, in terms of, Ashley's the sort of cool, sensible, historical one, and Michelle's
an anxious mess.
And Michelle is an anxious mess. I was just going to say, and Michelle is Michelle, and figure that the listener would kind of... But yeah, absolutely. And now it's kind of like, in a good way, I think we've both adopted something of the other's character. I mean, since we're here, it's good to have you as a friend, darling. So...
And you. Love the shit out of you, You I genuinely mean that.
You too, darling.
That was quite wholesome.
That was wholesome, wasn't it? Gosh, check us out. Anyway... So let's do the slightly less wholesome stuff that we have made it our job to do, and let's talk about some news.
So our only terrible news this week, and it is terrible, is a follow-up on last week's main and only story that took up the whole episode. The UK government's Women and Equalities Minister Liz Truss recently announced to the Women and Equality Select Committee that she intends to reform the Gender Recognition Act with 3 guiding principles: to protect single-sex spaces, to ensure that trans people can live without persecution whilst maintaining proper checks and balances. Don't know what that means, that sounds scary. And to protect under 18s from making irreversible healthcare decisions. For those who may not be aware, issues around trans under 18s and single-sex spaces have almost nothing to do with the Gender Recognition Act, but that did not appear to stop her. There have since been some developments that have revealed more about how Liz Truss is thinking on these issues and who she may have been listening to when coming up with these guiding principles.
Yes, and I think we can safely say that she's not letting facts get in the way. We begin our tale with a tweet from Maya Forstetter, a prominent gender-critical activist who we have spoken about before, when she attempted and failed through the courts to make holding transphobic and bigoted views a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. Yes, you heard that right. Someone took it to court with the intention of demonstrating that holding quote-unquote gender-critical views is itself a protected characteristic and should be afforded the protected characteristic status granted under the Equality Act of 2010. Fortunately, this attempt failed. But in a tweet, Forstad had claimed that a project by Equaliteach called Free to Be had misrepresented the Equality Act, and she took offence to infamous transphobic groups Transgender Trend, Women's Place UK and Fair Play for Women being labelled by the project as being anti-LGBT. Unfortunately for her, as far as we could see, the project got the Equality Act absolutely right, and those groups are very much anti-LGBT, and specifically, they are incredibly transphobic. The Free to Be documentation correctly stated that their guidance on how schools should handle trans issues is incorrect. Now, this absolutely appears to be the case, and we would go further and say that it is outright dangerous, as Transgender Trend recommends outing young trans people to their parents or teachers, whether the child wants that to happen or not.
Astonishingly, Liz Truss actually replied to Forstater on Twitter, saying that This document was not approved by government. It does not reflect government policy. The Government Equalities Office logo should not be on it, and I have asked for it to be removed. As the documentation that was released as part of this project did feature the Government Equality Office logo on it, and we will get into why that was a thing later on. But subsequently, the Government Equalities Office released this statement on Twitter. The LGBT guidance for primary schools published by Equaliteach does not reflect government policy. GEO had no input into the document. The GEO logo has been removed.
So far, lots of wrangling. So, to clarify, Free to Be was a project that took place over the last 12 months in 30 different London primary schools, where they have trained staff to recognise homophobic and transphobic bullying and provided materials to support LGBT youngsters throughout their school life. And that is what the minister was saying was not government policy. So why then the document feature the GEO logo on the cover? Because it turns out that the GEO did fund the Free to Be project, but now under Liz Truss, they appear to want nothing to do with it. So we have, of course, reached out to the GEO with many, many questions about this, but predictably all that we got was the following.
A GEO spokesperson said... They included that as a thing we have to read out, so we are.
Yeah.
The GEO... They may never give us a statement again if they ever hear this. The GEO had no input into the guidance documents, and we have asked the organisation to remove our branding. We reached out to Equaliteach for their take, and they had no comment at this time, but they did say they may have something for us during the week, so we will follow up on this next week as and when they get back to us.
And finally, do have a guess, listener, which trans and LGBT-related organisations Liz Truss follows on Twitter. You might think Stonewall, perhaps, or the LGBT Foundation, or Mermaids, but no. Not anyone else but the LGB Alliance, Transgender Trend, and the LGBT Conservatives. So I think we might all be able to see what this could mean. So there's a lot of stuff feeding into this, like, you know, a project and this and that and the other, and this group saying, oh, well, that was to do with us, but it sort of was, but they seem to be distancing themselves from it now, and it's... There was something else about Transgender Trend specifically, though, which is that they are seeking legal action against Equaliteach. So they were the ones running the Free to Be project in the 30 London schools. So Transgender Trend are suing that organisation for describing them correctly as a hate group.
Well, they haven't started anything yet. Basically, I just got that before we started recording from looking at their tweets. They said that they were taking advice. So that could mean a legal case later on down the line, which we know Transgender Trend and the GC community love to do. But I honestly don't see it going anywhere because I don't know how any judge anywhere could see Transgender Trend and be like, they're not anti-LGBT.
Yeah, there's no way you can look at their material and say, yeah, this is perfectly reasonable. But they've presented it that way, haven't they? That document that they produced for schools that specifically said, oh, no, trans people are evil and basically a virus and need to be exterminated. And it put that in much, much nicer language, but that was essentially what the document was saying, and this was professionally done and sent out, and they've got money for court cases, and they've got money, you know, where do these fucks get their money from? That's what I get so annoyed about. Every week, particularly during coronavirus, so many trans people are sharing crowdfunders so they can access like revision surgery or HRT or even just a safe place to live, like enough money to get out of an abusive situation. And these people, these lying, bigoted, horrible fucks just snap their fingers and get 30 grand mysteriously appearing in a crowdfunder, and it is infuriating.
The lawyers that these people use are probably loving it because they're getting paid regardless if they win or lose, and they always lose. Like, always. There's never been...
They do always lose. There is that.
Because their cases are absurd on the ground floor. Like, if an organisation releases guidance for schools that says we should try and talk children out of their queer identity, how is that not terrible, bigoted, anti-LGBT guidance? And that is what Transgender Trend do specifically in regards to transgender children who are very much in the LGBT. So to call them anti-LGBT isn't exactly astonishing or even close to a libelous claim. Like, I'm just going to say it. Transgender Trend, you are a bigoted hate group and you are anti-LGBT. Come at me.
Because they say, oh, no, we support, LGBT people, which is kind of the line that the LGBT Alliance have taken on it. They say, oh, no, we fully support LGBT people, even though they clearly don't, but they pretend that they do. But it's quite difficult for that line of argument to really stand up to any scrutiny, because to say, oh, well, trans people are weird, but, gay and lesbian and bisexual people, that's all fine. We realise that the psychology from many years ago was a mistake, that it's not a disease that people need to be locked up for, blah, blah, blah. We've realised that, but yeah, trans people, they're definitely a step too far. You can trust us this time. I know we're right this time. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, but I think the main point from all of this is that this is who Liz Truss is listening to. And when she replied to the Mayor Forstater tweet pointing out specifically the naming of Women's Place UK, Fair Play for Women and Transgender Trend, I think that she was saying that the guidance released by the Free to Be Project by Equality was not government policy. But I think this was also her saying that they do not see Transgender Trend, Women's Place UK and Fair Play for Women as anti-LGBT groups. And this is one of the questions I asked the GEO, which they did not answer, to try and get clarification on this. So I can only say I think. There's no confirmation, but if you look at who she is following on Twitter, she is not following anyone but transphobic hate groups and the LGBT conservatives who have been silent on this issue. And I know because I've asked them and I've checked them and I've heard nothing back. I've been talking to LGBT conservatives all week on various things, and there seems to be a closing of ranks. I know that there are friends of trans people in the Conservative Party who are working on this. I have heard rumours and heard whispers and spoken to people.
Well, they're not working on it hard enough, are they? Given all the stuff that we've had to put up with from the government and from the press over the last few months. So for the Tory party, for anybody who's a member of the Tory party to claim that they are a friend of trans people and I will fight for you, it's like, well, get the fuck on with it, really. Where have you been all this time?
Yeah, I think that needs to be said. I mean, honestly, we need action on this right now, and we need public demonstration from conservative LGBT people who, as much as me and Ashley find the idea of conservative politics distasteful, these people do exist. And a few of them listen to our show, and we need them to speak out now on this.
Literally, this. Because otherwise, what are you for, really? Like, if you're a sort of, oh, well, I'm trying to make the party better from the inside, great, that is absolutely a good thing to sort of try and do, but, like, you can't just ignore it when they're talking about potentially eliminating an entire category of person in the legal sense. They're saying, oh, no, trans people, we want them to live to the best of their ability with checks and balances. What's that going to look like? Do you think that's going to be sunshine and rainbows? Do you think that's going to make things easier for us?
No, because persecution could mean something totally different to them than it does to us. Because Liz Truss is a cis woman. She has certain privileges there. She has a lot of privileges considering her position and all sorts of other factors of her identity. She won't necessarily understand what persecution is for trans people. To her, persecution will be, maybe, being able to live without being beaten up, and that's it. Whereas blocking us from toilets could totally not count as persecution in her eyes. But the important thing to say is to any LGBT conservatives who may be listening is you've got to pick a side on this. You've got to pick a side because you've got to think what is more important to you. The other policies the Conservatives have that resonate with you or your community. You've got to pick one. This doesn't mean you have to stop being right-wing. It doesn't even mean you have to stop being a member of the Conservative Party. It just means you have to speak up now. We need your voices. And I know that we have denigrated you on the show many times before, but this is about so much more. Because we honestly don't know what's coming in the summer. Honestly, have no idea what Liz Truss is planning to announce. She says that she is going to announce something before the summer recess of Parliament. That is the 21st of July. Although I have heard in several places that Liz Truss is seen as incompetent in the party, and there's probably a good chance that a lot of that is from misogyny, but also I've been hearing it a lot from people who don't strike me as misogynists. So there may be some element of truth to it. I mean, I think we've all seen when she has done some gaffe-prone speeches. I think those have gone around Twitter a lot So there may be something more to it.
And they are pretty hilarious, to be perfectly honest. Pears. Like, why on earth would you get so... Why would you get so annoyed about pears? Well, we'll have to see what's coming, won't we? But so to all of our trans people, friends, fans, etc., listening, who are not perhaps on the right wing of things, and you may be thinking, oh well, the political party I'm involved with, I should speak out in there and do the thing. Yes, you should do that. But let's start talking about mutual aid in communities, because this coronavirus thing is not going to be going away anytime soon, but I suspect if things are going to go in a slightly unpleasant direction for the next few years, then we're going to really need to support each other and not take chunks out of each other for whatever reason, because got bigger fish.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's going to be a lot of positive things coming down. There's going to be some tough times because the economy is facing a downturn. There will be an economic depression that will become more noticeable once lockdown measures get reduced. Also, with the Liz Truss guided principles suggesting that she may be announcing something in the summer that is not necessarily to our liking as a community, we need to reach out to each other now more than ever. We need to start setting up networks where there aren't any already. So to do that, I need to put the call out for everyone to reach out in their networks to all the people that are there and reaffirm those connections. Message trans people you haven't talked to in a while, message people who work for organisations who you haven't talked to in a while, and start building up connections now, because we've got a few months until these two double whammy things hit. And obviously the economy is a more wide-reaching topic, but there will be detrimental effects for the trans, non-binary and intersex community. So we need to do exactly what you said, Ashley. We need to get together and exchange resources and get each other through it. But there's also some things you can do in regards to Liz Truss specifically. Write to your MP. We'll provide a link on where you can find your MP's address, and we will also provide links to some templates that have been floating around. But the important thing is to personalise them. Take the template and then make them your own, because if you send in hundreds of letters that are all exactly the same, they'll get thrown in the bin, because that's what will happen. And also, maybe write a letter to Liz Truss. Not a mean one, because I don't think meanness is going to work with her, because she has almost certainly come at this from the LGB Alliance standpoint that trans people are this gross, hate-filled community that attack women and all this other nonsense. So maybe politely just tell her your story. I will provide an address for you to do that. We will provide in the description the address for her constituency office where her people will at least read your messages, read your letters, and maybe change a few minds around her staff, which could be worth its weight in gold these days. Alright, so that was a pretty rubbish bunch of terrible news. Hopefully that'll work out fine. I guess we'll find out in the summer. But before the summer, right now, we have got a couple of guests here to talk about something that's very important, because as we all know, COVID-19 is a thing that will never, ever end. Oh, God. I know, if you haven't heard, we've got the story for you, listeners.
Yeah, boy, do we have some news for you. But that pandemic, this global crisis, is having an impact in places that you wouldn't necessarily have expected it to. And as well as definitely in some places where you absolutely would, knowing what we do about government competence in so many ways. So to talk over a couple of the issues that we have seen a lot, not just in our friend circle, but in the news, we have two magnificent guests.
Yeah, we've got a couple of guests here. So, guests, introduce yourselves. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Shash. I'm from Cardiff. I'm an activist and an Indian trans woman. I have struggled with CPTSD, depression, and anxiety. At the moment, I'm currently off work permanently for it and in the process of trying to get better in some fashion. Hopefully, we'll see.
And I'm Zipporah. I'm from the United States, and I am a gender confused, non-binary woman, question mark sort of thing. And I am disabled. I have a cluster of autoimmune diseases that limit my mobility and impact my immune system. And I am a freelance writer and full-time sick person.
So, as disabled people in the trans and non-binary communities, how has lockdown, COVID-19, all this stuff affected you so far?
For me personally, it's been kind of difficult to be cut off from the queer community and other sources of support. And, you know, in the United States, we have Pride in the summer. I'm not sure how it happens overseas or when it happens overseas, but we've had to reschedule or cancel a lot of our Pride events and try to make them more accessible to people to do them remotely. So that's one thing I'm a little sad about, but I'm also very happy that they're taking the safety of others seriously enough to be able to make remote Pride a thing.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that over here in the UK. There's been Mumsnet, not Mumsnet. Oh, no, the opposite of Mumsnet.
Yeah, why on earth bringing them up?
Because my brain is firing on all cylinders today, clearly. Mermaids, the British transgender children's charity, did a thing called DigiFest a few weeks ago, which was a lot of fun. Pride in London has got a few things going on. Yeah, Prides are definitely embracing Zoom technology to happen. Shash, seeing as you have more mental health-based disabilities, how have things been there in regards to your mental health? Are you doing all right?
I'm doing okay. Part of my mental health, the reason I have CPTSD was I was basically in isolation for 2 years in a foreign country. I had little to no access with the outside world, so I couldn't communicate with friends or people that I trust. So actually, this whole quarantine thing is a bit of a walk in the park for me. I'm more comfortable because I got my fiance and I'm alone and I'm able to handle that to a degree where it's easier. And prior to this, I was mostly housebound due to not being able to leave the house by myself, which is part of why I struggle. I have to be with someone who I trust. In this case, it's usually my partner, who's also my carer. So I'm surprisingly doing okay. Although I finally got to start therapy in like the beginning of this year, and obviously one of my things to progress was to go outside more, and I was doing that, and then lockdown happened, and then it's kind of like, you gotta put a pin in that right now and we'll take a break. And it's kind of made things like that a bit more difficult. For example, I was about to start EMDR, which is therapy for PTSD, and unfortunately you can't really do that virtually, so that's also been put on hold. So it's kind of put a hold on my recovery in general. However, I'm in a place at the moment where I'm comfortable, so it could be a lot worse, I guess. However, I'm lucky in the sense that I had the money to go private in the first place. I've been still on the NHS pathway, and I had phone calls just recently saying, we're going to have to reschedule your stabilization because they want me to do that before they went PTSD clinic for whatever reason.
Stabilization. I'm not familiar with that.
It's like emotional stabilization therapy or something. I had an appointment with the PTSD clinic. They said I was too emotionally unstable to take on therapy for whatever reason. I wasn't, but again, I couldn't exactly argue with them, their assessment, because it was post everything. That was in October, and they said, we'll refer you back to your CMHT, which is our community mental health team, which is the secondary care you get referred to from your GP. It's a mess, to say the least.
I think that's a very familiar story to a lot of people listening, and to me. I had to go private for my ADHD assessment, and by the way, listeners, thank you so much for helping me pay for that. Thank you so much. I'm so fucking grateful. Anyway, before I start getting on my knees and thanking people in the world, Zipporah, you are in the States.
Yeah, I actually, when you were talking, Shash, a lot of what you were saying is very similar to what I've experienced. I've been mostly homebound for the past few years. So for me, transitioning from homebound to homebound was not too much of a challenge, but also like you, it's been very difficult to get certain services. Before this, I was on home health physical therapy. And I would have somebody come to where I am and give me physical therapy there. That's not really been able to be something I've been able to. I just recently relocated to a different city, to Nashville, Tennessee. And since relocating, this kind of happened right away. And so I haven't been able to find a new physical therapist or anything like that. And along the lines of therapy as well, I was just about to start EMDR as well. for my own CPSD. And yeah, you can't do that with teletherapy. It's like not something you can do remotely. So it's very difficult. And I definitely feel a lot of what you're saying there.
Yeah, it's a stumbling block, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely. I've had a few things that I've had to leave the house for like medically. I had some infusions that I had to go to, but I don't know. Those things just are extra difficult right now because I don't really have public transportation in the city, but even if we did, it wouldn't really be safe for me to take. And things like Uber and Lyft, it's really hard to know how safe those vehicles are because they transport multiple people a day. So, it's been a little bit difficult to find like individual people to help me out. My roommate ended up having to like take me to and from all of my appointments just to kind of keep me safe. So all those fun little extra challenges that come along with, nobody really being 100% sure of how contagious they are.
Yeah, I can imagine as an immunocompromised person that is... I mean, I've been out of the house once, I think, since lockdown started. Twice. I've been out twice since lockdown started in the UK. And I'm jumping around in the supermarket like the world's worst version of Frogger, and to my knowledge, my immune system is fine. I can't imagine how terrifying that must be, especially if you have physical disabilities that make movement harder.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And it's also kind of similar to Shash. My recovery was just about to kind of get the ball rolling. I was just starting to leave my house again. I had my first trip to the supermarket by myself, and it was amazing. It was so great to go out by myself and pick out my own food and, load up my own car. That was all so wonderful. And now it has been ripped away out of my hands. But yeah, just little things like that kind of make the recovery process significantly less linear than it otherwise would have been.
I'm only really coming to terms with the label of disabled in regards to myself recently, and I wasn't really intending on me being a subject in this segment, but a lot of what you said made a lot of sense in that I had got my ADHD diagnosis. That has been a lifelong mystery and has caused severe disruption in my life, but also some really cool things, like this podcast would not exist without it, because it very much came from waking up one day, my mind racing, just like, oh, I'm going to do this now. But my plan was to sort of get ready to go and get like some kind of job that would be able to sustain me so I can get off benefits and maybe even try and get back into the world a little bit. And COVID has been massive fucker. It's obviously a massive fucker for so many reasons. But I think everyone I know in my life has lost something. To varying degrees. I don't believe that everyone's equal under COVID. I'm not a conservative. But, like, everyone has lost something that they were hoping to do. And yeah, I guess with people with disabilities, it can be more crushing because you're trying to claw your way back into the world in some cases.
And things like recovery, physical therapy for people with acquired disabilities, occupational therapy, all those sorts of things have had to be put on hold. And even people without acquired disabilities, a lot of people are still dependent upon, that physical therapy and that OT in order to help them be able to continue to do the things that they need to do every day. So that's been difficult. I have another thing I thought of, actually, that just kind of occurred to me. Being disabled, my carer is also my significant other, but I am in a long distance relationship. So he is stuck very far away from me. So I am stuck without him for now, which means I have had to, like, for example, reduce the amount of times I can take a bath, things like that I kind of require some assistance with, particularly washing my hair has been a bitch since this started. And I'm just, used to being able to have like some sort of help, but it's not even safe for him to come visit me. I don't know when I'm going to see him again. So it's been kind of interesting trying to figure out how to do some of these things on my own. And for the things that I cannot do on my own, like usually I can't wash my hair on my own, just finding ways around that. I've invested in a lot of headbands.
Headband life for the win. That's what I've been doing.
Get your hair out your eyes, it's just, there's nothing else. So I think there are so many things that it plays into, isn't it? Not just as a kind of personal experience on the ground kind of thing, as we as individuals are kind of legally bound at this point to stay inside and not go anywhere, and the things that might be available for people to do, although the accessibility of those things is another live issue, which I'm sure we will come back to. But just in terms of, we're all kind of here stuck at home trying to do the thing, and a lot of people are encountering the same problems. And this is my long-winded way of getting into talking about how companies and businesses have now, at this point in history and time and whatever, during this pandemic, have decided that all of the accessibility stuff, or reasonable adjustments and working from home, flexible hours, a job share, that kind of thing, all of those things, which were absolutely, no, we're not going to do that. That's completely impossible. We won't be doing that. And all of a sudden, yes, they are. Yes, they very much are doing those things. Everybody's working from home. Everybody is dialing in on Zoom and whatever else, as we are doing at this very moment. And when that started, when suddenly companies who I knew had employees who'd asked them about reasonable adjustments, and had been knocked back, and those companies then starting to say, we're doing the thing. It's like, so as soon as it starts to affect the bottom line, as soon as it starts to affect the kind of company element of this, the making money, then they're all over it. Because they, it's like, well, we have to keep all of our staff and whatever. I'm just wondering, given that I'm assuming that you have seen the same thing as well and heard the same rhetoric, what are your thoughts on that now, that accessibility for Ableds trend?
I'm not super happy about it. Personally, I was not able to complete college because of inaccessibility and having my university tell me that it would not be possible for me to do certain classes without being in person, that I had to give certain presentations in person and could not do them over a video chat program, that certain material, you had to have an in-person class discussion in order to understand it. So I was given those kinds of excuses by my university over and over and over again. And that led to me not having my degree for 3 or 4 years longer than I would have been able to get it if they had allowed me to have those reasonable accommodations. And then on top of that, just applying for jobs. I've been rejected from so many jobs because they couldn't have somebody who needed to work from home, even just part-time. So that's been a little frustrating to witness.
I've always known that they never consider, companies and institutions in general just don't consider people who are disabled if they need any adjustments, because for them it's, well, enabled person will just produce more labor or work or whatever, and therefore they are more valuable. So why do we need to accommodate disabled people? That's their obvious line of thinking, because again, it affects whatever output they do. Yeah, I had a similar issue with my uni, and I didn't get to, had to drop out. And I was lucky in the sense that I could force myself to go in, but at detriment to my mental health. And then on top of that, when I was working, it was, and this is before I even had therapy or anything like that, I had to travel pretty far. I can't drive. I don't have a license or a car. So I had to catch public transport, and that would take about an hour on bus, and that's catching like a bus that's not necessarily frequent and in an area I don't particularly know.
So if you miss it by a bit, you are late by a long way.
Yeah, essentially. And so I'd make it in. They say it was flexible working, but really it was like, well, you've got core hours and then you can add bits and hours. And for me, well, if I'm just traveling with public transport, I don't really have a choice in the sense of which hours I choose. So my days were 9 to 5. There was no like, oh, I can stay till 7, because if I stay till 7, there's no way I can get home. Plus during the winter, it'd be too dark. And for me, that's one of my fears. And I can't do that. It's just not possible or safe for me in any way. I asked multiple times that could I do some days from home, because I was literally, as I'm doing now, sitting at a desk, talking, having meetings barely, like at 12 o'clock, a quick 5-minute meeting, and then carrying on with work. They anticipate some people working from home, and they allow it for some people definitely higher up, which is a lot more common. I've noticed that in corporate structure, definitely, where if you're higher up in the corporate ladder, they allow you to work remotely more for whatever reason. it baffled me. Even though I did have to work with some on-site equipment, it wasn't necessary for me to be in every day to do things. And eventually I had to leave unrelated to sick leave, but there was no adjustments they could make because they kept saying they wanted me back in work to like do a little bit, like get back into work slowly because I'd been off sick for a certain amount of time. They weren't budging on the adjustments of remote work or anything like that. And it was like, well, they are now, I'm pretty sure. They're definitely working remotely from wherever. I'm just pissed off. Just pissed off, really. And it's not just things like that. It's like when applying for welfare or benefits, it's, oh, you need a face-to-face UC appointment. So when I had to apply for UC once I was finished my work, I couldn't do in-person stuff at the time. I needed my carer to help me with everything in that stage. And it was a point where I struggled to, and there was no need for this face-to-face appointment. It was about 10 minutes. Like I had to spend hours readying myself up to go in for this 10-minute appointment to tell them, oh yeah, that's fine, you don't need to work or whatever, to look for work, because you need to, that's the reason they wanted an appointment. They want to say, oh, we need to establish if you can be able to be looking for work or not, even though this person I'm talking to is clearly not a medical practitioner of any sort. So I don't know how they can assess, even though I just needed to hand them a GP fit note. Yeah, so I was working myself up for hours before this appointment. I had to get up, helped into the shower, make sure that I wasn't in pain because of the sheer night terrors I get. My body would just lock up during the night, and therefore I would be in physical pain from the morning, and sometimes so lightheaded because I had sweat through everything I had, even if it is a minus 10 degrees Celsius day. And I'd almost pass out from just getting up. And all these things just so this person who could have done this over the phone or didn't need to do it at all, really. I could have sent them a scan of whatever they needed. And for me to go into town on a bus full of people that I am constantly, my head's on a swivel due to my CPTSD, so I'm constantly hyper alert and on edge all the time, stressing myself out. And now suddenly everyone gets telephone appointments, and I'm just like, so it was clearly you didn't need it. You didn't need this 10-minute appointment when you could have just done it over the phone. And it's so many things like that where it's just painfully obvious that they could have done this anytime and they refuse to because it's easier for them and not easier for the people involved.
Yeah, almost exactly the same thing happened to me, in that when I first had a crisis, and ADHD was a big part of that, but also a lot of stuff from being trans in the closet and living through Section 28 and stuff really like mashed my mind. And I was having anxiety attacks in front of the job centre person who was just like, so have you thought about getting off benefits and getting a job? And I'm there like, and it was just like, there was no need for any of that. There was no need. They could, and eventually, like, I got on the support group for employment and support allowance, and they left me alone. But anyway, I could rant about the DWP and the job centre. Zipporah, if you don't know, they're the people that do like welfare for us.
Oh no, yeah, I'm familiar and very jealous.
Yeah, I mean, it is better, but also the Conservatives have made it into a system that is punishing.
Yes, it's a very relative. I realized that as soon as I said that. I have some friends who have been treated just terribly by the NHS, and also just, with their disability assessments have had the most god-awful experiences. So, yeah, I'm not saying the UK health system is by any means ideal.
Yeah, it's definitely got its issues, but that'll probably be something that we cover more in depth another time. So I wanted to ask, in general, away from the difficulties of COVID and then the reality that it turns out that they could have been doing all of this cool stuff for disabled people right from the fucking start, how has your gender identities intersected with your disabilities? I mean, I could start on this very briefly. I was in the closet growing up, and I had ADHD, didn't know it at the time. So I was crap at things. A lot of people were being very, oh, you're rubbish at this, pay attention, look here. Just asking things of me that my brain would not let me do without medication, it turns out. And intersecting with my gender identity, like when I was 5, it was like 1990. I'm probably going to make myself sound so old to you two. And it was very much at a time where it was illegal for anyone to say that being gay, trans was okay in a school. So I had those two things in parallel. Like, I was incapable of being like everybody else, but also I had this secret.
I don't know how familiar you are with like the queer crip theory, but it talks a lot about compulsory heterosexuality, compulsory cisgenderedness, and compulsory abledness all kind of have a lot of overlap, where people are forced into performing cisgenderedness, heterosexuality, and abledness. And I think that's, I always think of that whenever I think of kind of the overlap in disability issues and queer issues. And, Shash, what you were saying earlier with how they would still make you come in, and how for a lot of people, if they cannot physically see the disability, then they don't believe it, and they might be even more likely to try and force you into their idea of what abled should look like.
Yeah, like for example, I was having panic attacks when I was like in year 3, but I didn't know there were panic attacks. No one told me there were panic attacks. I was just hyperventilating to them, and they just put me in the reception area and expected it just to go away. And like, they didn't tell like my family or anything. And I tried telling my family, and they were just like, "Oh, it's okay. You're fine now, I guess." And that's the thing. And so I, obviously being a 7 to 8 year old or whatever, I thought, well, I guess if they say it's fine, I guess it's fine. That's the issue. It's like when large part of like CPTSD is from familial abuse. I was pressured a lot to follow a certain path and that kind of thing. And for me, a lot of it was the conflict with my gender identity also affected things like my inability, like I was considered a quiet kid and stuff like that. I was terrible at like public speaking and stuff, and it was clear that I had very bad anxiety that, looking back on, obviously I can see, but then I didn't know how to describe it. I just thought I was a weak, timid person, and that I had to fight it somehow. And obviously being AMAB, so they were like, "Oh yeah, you're a man, so don't cry and don't do this, that, and the other." And on top of that, it was just kind of like, well, I'm already having a terrible time with my gender identity. I do not need this rhetoric pushed on me as well, trying to force people into that toxic masculinity kind of thing. And like, it was painfully obvious that like it works for people who are cisgendered, who are heterosexual, and they thrive in that scenario, but they thrive in such a way that is okay for this society, if that makes sense. It's like they thrive with others, and they're able to cooperate and work well with other cis, hetero, and able-bodied people. And it's painfully obvious because the minute they interact with anyone outside of that norm, you can see it happen, like the gears turning, as like that, oh, I have no idea how to interact in this area, so I'm just going to interact with sheer confidence that you're just like everyone that I usually interact with. And that's where like they don't understand the needs of people who are disabled or people who do struggle with gender identity. My gender identity, the reason that I was socially isolated in a foreign country was because I came out as trans. And so a large part of that was, for example, like growing up and stuff that would cause me, there would be traumatic things that happens, like I wasn't able to like grow out my hair or wear clothing I wanted, or there's things like just simple things like, oh, if I wore this, it'd be look too feminine or whatever, and or just small things where it's repeated slights on my self-esteem. I've got this behavior pattern with CPTSD, is like being like a people pleaser kind of thing. So I will sometimes, without like realizing it still, I will try to help a person or make a person feel positive emotions, happy, whatever.
As a self-protection
Yes,
kind of
as a
thing.
self-protection, in detriment to myself. So, for example, a large part of that would be like stuck in this abusive cycle. A lot of it would be, I'll try and conform as much as I can so I don't get hurt again. And then on top of that, it'd be like, so I'll try and be masculine. I'll try and be cis. I'll try and conform to their ideal, and then it'll be like, I can't do this anymore. It is too dysphoric. It's too painful. And then unintentionally, my dysphoria would cause me to stop playing along, which would then be my family would be like, oh, it's time for abuse. We need to put you back into your place so you can play along again, essentially. And that was a repetitive cycle. And especially in that 2 years I was isolated, that was what I was going through all the time. So yeah, a large part of it is why I have CPTSD is because of how people reacted to my gender identity.
I can relate to a lot of that because it's very, very isolating being in the closet anyway. You obviously have more axes of oppression than I have as a white trans woman with one disability going on. And it's very interesting to hear that, how they sort of all became one thing. Like, it's like people around you were just like, oh, Shash is just, Shash is Shash.
Yeah.
That's their deal. Zipporah, have you had similar experiences like that?
Yeah, I have. The idea that once you are kind of different, people feel like they have to treat you like other people that they're more used to, that like Shash was talking about. That's definitely something I've encountered. And I feel like that mostly comes out when I'm using or when I'm particularly visibly disabled. So if I'm using a wheelchair or my rollator and I have my very large service dog in his bright red vest next to me, a lot of people will feel kind of obligated to be like, I didn't even notice you were in a wheelchair. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure you did. Things like that, where it's kind of like, you don't really have to wash my disability out of how you interact with me to make me feel comfortable at all. I feel perfectly comfortable with my disability. And so, it's just kind of when other people feel the need to talk to you as if you are, heterosexual, as if you are cisgendered, as if you are abled, as if you are, the quote unquote standard or whatever is considered the norm. And I find that kind of dehumanizing because it takes away those parts of me that are a part of me. As far as some other overlap with being not cisgender and with being disabled, there's a few other areas that I've especially noticed. One of them is private bathrooms. For example, on college campuses, single stall bathrooms. That's something that benefits both trans people and disabled people. And another really big area where it's had an impact is going through airport security. Our airport security, TSA, when you need a pat down, what they do is they look at you, they assume your gender based upon your appearance, and then they call over an employee who they have also assumed the gender of, also based upon their appearance, and then you get a pat down. And that's always kind of uncomfortable just because you have people calling out what they think your gender is. It's an uncomfortable situation to correct people in. And I also, have never had anybody ask me how I identify, and I've never had anybody offer a non-binary agent to do my pat down, which is really what I would prefer. That's what I would be most comfortable with. But that's not an option currently. And so that's one of the areas where it is kind of frustrating to be struggling with your gender identity and to also have a disability.
That's very much where I have a privilege because I identify as a woman. So if I need to be patted down for any reason, I mean, it's a pretty obvious choice as long as I don't open my mouth. That's the thing that outs me. That and running out of foundation, which is what has happened. Gosh darn lockdown life. So obviously many of our listeners will be able-bodied and relatively free of mental health disorders. There's going to be some people out there who want to help in some way. How can people help people in your situations?
Listen to people who are disabled, really. Don't think of disabled people as they need constant need and help, or like you need to help them or something. But most of the time, disabled people will be looking for professional avenues of help, and they know what they're doing and they are knowledgeable on the fact. So we don't need your recommendations on finding a doctor or something like that. What we need is making sure your places of employment, business, homes and stuff are accessible and you are accommodating. And like one of the main things when I'm running workshops or anything is making sure it is accessible to people who are physically disabled or mentally disabled, where we can help people who have, like, there is a dedicated area for people to go if they're having a panic attack, or if there's a system of communication that's non-verbal in place in case people aren't verbal for whatever reason. And it's small things like that can go a long way. A popular system that I've seen is like a traffic light system. It's kind of green is that I'm willing to be approached and talk to people, etc. Or yellow is that I don't want to be approached, but I will approach you if I want to talk to anything. And red is I don't want any kind of contact whatsoever. Just leave me alone. I'm just here to observe. And I've found that really useful. And a group that does that a lot is Stonewall. They do at all their conferences and workshops and stuff. They employ that system, it's amazing, because especially when things like networking or anything like that, it can be horrible for someone who has crippling anxiety just talking to someone or anything like that. And then you have these people approach you, and it can help someone a lot. And like having information that is visible for people, like they don't have to talk to people or anything like that, where it says where the nearest like disabled bathroom is, where is the nearest place to be safe, or where you can be alone, or is a quiet space, whatever. The information that needs to be visible wherever it is. If you're in a hall or a conference, it needs to be on like a piece of paper as soon as you come in, saying this is where these things are that can be helpful. There may be a designated person you could talk to who deals with that kind of thing, instead of having to approach every single staff member and hoping they know something or something that can help you, and you're just saying, well, can you get someone else that can help me, or do I have to go like I'm Pac-Man around this maze looking for the particular ghost or something that can help me with this?
I think we've all been Pac-Man in that situation at various points. Zipporah, any advice for people listening on how to help?
Yeah. So here in the United States, where we value capitalism over human lives, a lot of these stay-at-home orders have been lifted in many different states, even though those states have not yet peaked in their COVID cases.
I think they might be soon.
Oh, yes. So that's going to be a joy. So my state is one of those states, Tennessee. Georgia's another one. So for people in states that don't have a stay-at-home order, I am begging you to please stay the fuck home. I'm sorry, to please stay home.
You can swear. We swear all the fucking time. Stay the fuck home, Tennessee.
Stay the fuck home. Right. I forgot y'all are British.
We are explicit on Apple Podcasts, which means we can say whatever the fuck we like.
All right, beautiful. So I'm begging you all to stay the fuck home. Stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home. And also what everybody else has been saying the whole time is just wash your hands very carefully. And those two things would help make my life as an immunocompromised person so much easier, and it will help me to actually go back into the world much sooner than I normally would be able to, by not trying to spread the pandemic as much as possible, as some places are doing. Cough, Las Vegas, cough. Yeah, and those things. And then just accessibility. So even after this is over, I am expecting for all of these companies to continue offering remote work opportunities and to continue offering these reasonable accommodations that they have been providing since this began. So that's one thing that I am very strong on. I want these companies to continue to offer these same remote work options and remote learning options. And I would hope that all my abled friends and allies would join me in putting pressure on these companies to continue offering those reasonable accommodations to make work and education more accessible to all types of disabled people.
Yeah, I could definitely get down with that, because on my diagnosis sheet for my ADHD, my doctor was very clear. You should get a job where you can work from home some days, because a full week for you is not going to happen at another office or something. So yeah, UK and America, get in contact with your people and say, make this permanent, this one aspect of the pandemic. Let's get rid of coronavirus, but keep this remote working thing, and also keep our mitts clean and stay the fuck indoors for our immunocompromised friends. So Shash, Sephora, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Where can people find you online?
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you. You can find me online on Twitter at Coffee Spoonie. That's COFFEESPOONIE.
You can find me on Twitter too. It's Shash1. So that's ITSSHASH1. Oh, can we also keep the social distancing 2 meters away from everyone? I really like that, actually. Just so people aren't next to me ever.
That's fair.
That's just really nice.
It's wonderful. I don't have just big rugby dudes in Cardiff bumping into me, expecting the right of way all of a sudden. I'm just like, no, leave me alone.
As a Londoner, yes to that.
Yes, thank you both very much for joining us, and stay safe, everybody. Stay, well, and wash your hands. But yes, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Oh, I really enjoyed that chat. That was cool.
Yeah, it was a good one to have, and it gives us I know it gives you and me a certain level of insight, but also the listener too. And there's a lot of stuff connected to this, honestly, a lot of things that I know that you and I and various friends of ours have been talking about for a while, and now it's kind of happening writ large on the world stage, and it was good to have that discussion.
Yeah, so you should totally go into the description and check out our link sheet, which will have information on how you can follow Shash and Zipporah. And also, whilst you're there doing some following, maybe you would consider following us on social media, that thing you do every day that ruins your day. You can get us on Twitter /WhatTheTrans. You can get us on Facebook /WhatTheTrans. You can get us on Instagram @WhatTheTrans. And also, we have a website.
Yes, we're official and everything.
Yeah, you can get to that on whatthetrans.com, because we are a real media outlet, because we got a .com. That's how it works.
Absolutely, we're official. We're an outlet. You can't take it back now. That's it. We're legit.
Yeah.
In fact, we're so legit on the internet these days that we have a Patreon. Because of course we do. Which is, of course, patreon.com/whatthetrans. I know, obviously, most of us don't have any money at the moment. I know you're broke, we're broke, but you can help by chucking us a couple of quid on Patreon if you're able to. If you like what we do and you want to support us, you could also leave us a review on whatever platform you happen to be listening on. And, of course, spreading the word about the show is always appreciated. So even if you don't have the money for things, like I don't, then absolutely, you can help us out and spread the good word in other ways, and we hope that you do.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you for listening, because I've been talking to a lot more people who are fans of the show lately, and you're all wonderful, and it really makes me feel warm in my waters, as my nan would say. Don't know what that means. It sounds kind of gross now I think about it.
A little bit, yeah.
My nan was great, but yeah, she had some very strange turns of phrase.
No, but you're right. I've spoken to some of the fans recently, and they're a lovely bunch. Warm, kind-hearted, intelligent, empathic, all that lovely stuff. Like, you guys are wonderful. So this has been a very nice, lush, wholesome sort of, oh, I love you, buddy episode, and I am totally here for that. So
yeah, we had some bad news and we had some dark things talked about in the meet, but yeah, I think having a sleep did us both some good. So on that note, I'm going to go back to bed. Thank you for listening, everyone. See you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
This episode of What the Trans was written, researched and presented by Ashley Talbot and Michelle O'Toole.
And produced by Joe Ross Barrett.
And it was edited by Michelle O'Toole, by Fox, whose Twitter is GleekFox, and Matt Reynolds, whose Twitter is Chai Tiefling. Links in the description.
And we'd also like to thank our patrons, who are Alexandra Lilly,
Anthony Pena,
April Heller,
Becky Scott Fairley,
Bernard's Pink Jellybean,
Cassius Adair,
Chris Hubley,
Claire Scott,
Derek Victor,
Desiree Markland,
Elliot McVeigh,
Emma Doyle,
Ian Coomber,
Kraken12,
Catherine,
Laker,
Lauren O'Nyons,
Lanos,
Maddie Bell,
Matt Reynolds,
Melissa Brooks,
Mike Dickinson,
Mina,
Molly,
Patreon user,
Samantha Alice Raven,
Sarah Aquatics,
and Sophie Lewis. Thank you for supporting the show. See you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye.